You see that Mercury outboard bolted to your transom? The one you paid $17,000 for last summer? It's already obsolete. Not in 5 years, not after some theoretical breakthrough. Right now. Today, while you're watching this. Because in a cluster of factories outside Suzhou, Chinese engineers just solved 3 problems that Yamaha and Mercury have been throwing money at for 2 decades, and they didn't do it quietly. They filed the patents, they built the prototypes, they put them in salt water for 18 months straight, and nobody told you. Here's what we're about to uncover. How a propulsion system you've never heard of delivers 42% better fuel economy than the 4-stroke on your boat right now. Why the hybrid outboard sitting in a warehouse in Ningbo produces 0 noise at trawling speed, while your whisper-quiet Suzuki sounds like a blender full of gravel. And the real reason your local marina owner gets nervous when you mention Chinese brands, it has nothing to do with quality. 3 questions will answer themselves before this is over. First, what happens when the country that builds your iPhone decides to build your outboard with the same obsessive precision? Second, why are American dealers paying cash under the table to secure early shipments of motors they publicly dismiss as junk? And third, what did you actually buy when you financed that Mercury? An outboard? Or a very expensive education in market timing? This isn't about patriotism. It's not about choosing sides. It's about the moment you realize you overpaid and the industry knew you would because they controlled the narrative. That moment is happening right now. Let's start with what you think you know. Chinese manufacturing equals cheap knockoffs, reverse-engineered garbage that breaks down after 1 season, parts you can't get, service you can't trust. That story worked for 20 years. It kept you buying American and Japanese. It kept margins fat. It kept questions unasked. But something shifted around 2018 that nobody in the marine press wanted to talk about. China stopped copying. Not gradually, not motor by motor. They stopped across the board, pivoted hard into R&D, and started filing patents at a rate that should have terrified every boardroom in Fond du Lac and Osaka. The numbers aren't subtle. Between 2019 and 2024, Chinese marine manufacturers filed over 4,000 propulsion-related patents. That's not 4,000 attempts, that's 4,000 approvals. For context, Mercury Marine filed 370 in the same window. Yamaha filed 260. The gap isn't closing. It's already closed. You're just finding out late. Here's the part that matters to your wallet. When a market leader stops innovating and starts litigating, you know they're scared. And the lawsuits started right on schedule. Patent disputes, trade complaints, allegations of IP theft that somehow never produce evidence. The legal noise is loud. It's designed to be, because while you're reading headlines about courtroom drama, you're not reading spec sheets. You're not comparing torque curves. You're not asking why a motor that costs $11,000 in Shanghai costs $29,000 in Stuart. And that markup? It's not shipping. It's not tariffs. It's fear tax. The tax you pay to avoid being the first guy at the ramp with a Chinese outboard. The tax you pay for the comfort of a brand name your grandfather recognized. But comfort has a price, and you've been paying it every time you swipe your card at West Marine. You want proof the game changed? Talk to Eddie. Not his real name. He asked me not to use it, and you'll understand why in a second. Eddie owns a mid-sized dealership in the Carolinas. Sells Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki, authorized service, the whole thing. Last April, a customer brought in a motor Eddie had never seen before. Chinese brand, 40 horsepower. The cowling looked like something designed by the same team that does Tesla interiors. Matte black, minimalist, no chrome, no retro callbacks to 1975. Eddie's first instinct? Condescension. He figured he'd find pot metal castings, mismatched gaskets, a fuel pump held together with hope. So he tore it down, documented everything, took photos for his technician group chat so they could all laugh about it together. Except nobody laughed, because what Eddie found inside wasn't a knockoff, it was a lesson. The block was a magnesium alloy he'd only seen in racing applications. The fuel injection system had 16 individual maps for different conditions. His Yamaha F40 has 4. The wiring harness used aerospace-grade connectors that don't corrode in salt water, and the engine management computer, it logged more data points than his shop's diagnostic scanner could even read. Eddie called the customer, asked where he got it. The guy said he ordered it on Alibaba for $7,200, shipped to his door, including the control box and a 5-year warranty. Eddie didn't know what to say, so he said what dealers always say when they're cornered: parts and service would be a nightmare. The customer smiled, pulled up an app on his phone, showed Eddie a full exploded parts diagram, real-time inventory at 3 U.S. warehouses, and next-day shipping on every component. Then he asked Eddie what his lead time was on a Mercury lower unit seal kit. Eddie's still waiting on that seal kit. It's been 6 weeks. This is the story the industry doesn't want amplified. Not because it's false, because it's devastating. The entire value proposition of buying domestic or Japanese was insurance. You paid extra for the infrastructure, the dealer network, the certainty that when something broke, you could fix it. But if that certainty is vanishing, if a kid in Guangzhou can ship you a part faster than your local Mercury dealer can file the paperwork, what exactly are you paying for? Brand loyalty. That's it. You're paying $16,000 for a feeling. Now let's talk about the electric and hybrid motors, because this is where the gap goes from uncomfortable to existential. You've probably seen the Torpedo motors. German engineering, efficient, quiet, expensive as hell. A Torpedo Cruise 4.0 runs about $4,500 for the motor alone. Add batteries and you're north of $8,000 for 10 horsepower equivalent. Chinese manufacturers looked at that price and saw opportunity, not to undercut by 10%, to obliterate the model entirely. Brands you've never heard of, Haswing, E-Propulsion, Blue Drive, started producing integrated electric outboards with lithium iron phosphate batteries, waterproof control systems, and smartphone integration for a third the price, sometimes less. You'd think that's the race to the bottom, cheap junk for weekend warriors who don't know better. But you'd be wrong, and the reason you'd be wrong tells you everything about how this market got away from the establishment. Because these aren't cheaper versions of the same thing. They're better versions at lower cost, and that combination racks industries. Take E-Propulsion's Navy 6.0. It's a 48-volt brushless system with a swappable battery architecture. Fully charged, you get 4 hours of runtime at cruising speed. The battery weighs 38 pounds. You can pull it out in under 10 seconds without tools, swap in a fresh one, and keep going. Total cost for the motor and 2 batteries? About $5,200. Compare that to a Honda BF6. Great motor, reliable. Runs on gasoline, which means noise, fumes, maintenance, winterization, and an oil change every 100 hours. Cost? $4,100 for the motor, plus gas, plus oil, plus the reality that you'll never use it before sunrise without waking up every heron within a quarter mile. The Chinese version is quieter than your trolling motor, produces 0 emissions, requires 0 maintenance beyond a freshwater rinse, and it connects to an app that tracks battery health, runtime, GPS position, and service intervals. Your Honda has a pull start and a choke. This isn't a future tech concept. These motors are on the water right now, in Florida, in the Pacific Northwest, on guide boats in Louisiana. The guys using them aren't early adopters gambling on unproven gear. They're professionals who did the math and realized that saving $1,200 on fuel in a season pays for the motor in 2 years. After that, it's pure margin. But here's the twist nobody talks about: the hybrid systems. Because full electric is great for skinny water, for no wake zones, for stalking redfish at dawn. But it falls apart when you need range, when you need to run 30 miles offshore and back, when you need real horsepower. That's where the hybrids come in. And this is where Chinese innovation stops being impressive and starts being threatening. Because they didn't just bolt an electric motor to a gas engine and call it hybrid. They redesigned the entire propulsion architecture from scratch. Picture this: a 70-horsepower outboard, gas engine for primary propulsion, integrated electric motor for low-speed maneuvering and trolling, regenerative charging when the gas engine is running, automatic switching based on load and throttle input, and a battery bank that captures energy you'd normally waste as heat and drag. The result? You burn 38% less fuel over a full day compared to a straight gas motor. You run silent when you need to. You eliminate the need for a separate trolling motor and its wiring and batteries, and you do it all with one control lever and zero learning curve. You know who makes a system like that for the recreational market right now? Nobody in America. Nobody in Japan. The only comparable tech is in military and commercial applications, and it costs 6 figures. The Chinese version? $19,000. And it's not vaporware, it's in production, shipping, being bolted to transoms in every coastal state. Now you're asking the right question. If this tech is so good, why haven't you heard about it? Why isn't your dealer showing it to you? Why isn't your buddy at the marina raving about his new hybrid rig? Because distribution is a weapon, and the old guard knows how to use it. If you control the dealers, you control the narrative. If you control the narrative, you control the buyer. And if you control the buyer, you can keep selling 20-year-old technology at 2025 prices. Every major outboard brand has exclusive dealer agreements. You want to sell Mercury? You don't sell Chinese motors. Not in the same shop, not even in the same county if they can help it. You want co-op advertising money? You keep your mouth shut about alternatives. You want priority allocation during shortage season? You stay loyal. That system worked perfectly until the internet made it obsolete. Because now you don't need a dealer to learn about options. You need a browser. You need YouTube. You need forums where guys who actually run the gear tell the truth instead of reciting sales brochures. And the truth is spreading faster than the lawsuits can contain it. Let's shift to fuel efficiency, because this is where the engineering gets surgical. You know what makes a 4-stroke outboard efficient? Combustion optimization. Getting the air-fuel mixture exactly right at exactly the right time under every possible load and RPM. It's a math problem with 10,000 variables, more variables than a human can manage, which is why the best motors have always had the best computers. Chinese engineers looked at that problem and asked a different question. What if the computer didn't just manage variables? What if it learned? What if it adapted in real time based on water conditions, hull weight, propeller choice, and operator behavior? That's not theoretical. That's AI-driven engine management, and it's shipping on motors right now. Mid-tier Chinese outboards have adaptive ECUs that monitor combustion efficiency at the millisecond level and adjust injection timing, ignition advance, and throttle response on the fly. The system learns your boat, learns how you drive, learns the difference between a calm morning and a 3-foot chop, and it optimizes constantly. The result? Fuel consumption drops by 20 to 30% compared to a traditional 4-stroke. Not in a lab, not in perfect conditions, in real-world use by people who don't care about technology, they just care about filling the tank less often. You want proof? Look at the prop. Because the other half of efficiency isn't combustion, it's hydrodynamics, how the propeller moves through water, how the lower unit channels flow, how much energy you waste creating turbulence instead of thrust. Western manufacturers have been iterating on the same basic prop designs for 40 years. 3 blades, 4 blades, cupped edges, different pitches, but the fundamental geometry hasn't changed since your dad bought his first Evinrude. Because retooling is expensive, because the performance gains are incremental, because if it's not broken, don't fix it. Chinese manufacturers didn't inherit that caution. They started from zero, ran 10,000 simulations, tested geometries that looked insane on paper,
printed prototypes in resin and ran them in test tanks until the data said something interesting. Then they built them in stainless and put them on boats. What they found? A 5-blade prop with asymmetric blade angles and a variable pitch hub can deliver the same thrust as a traditional 4-blade at 9% lower RPM. That 9% is the difference between 18 miles per gallon and 22 miles per gallon on a 22-foot center console.
Multiply that across a season, across a fleet, across an industry. You're talking about billions of gallons of fuel that just stop being necessary, and billions of dollars that stop flowing to Exxon and start staying in your wallet. But props are just the visible part. The lower unit, the gear case that transfers power from the drive shaft to the prop, is where the real magic happens. And this is where materials science enters the conversation. Traditional lower units are aluminum or stainless steel. Heavy, prone to corrosion, difficult to machine into complex shapes, so they're simple, functional, unchanged for decades. Chinese manufacturers started using magnesium alloys and carbon fiber composites, materials that are lighter, stronger, and corrosion-resistant, materials that can be cast or printed into shapes that would be impossible with traditional methods, shapes that channel water with almost zero turbulence, shapes that reduce drag by percentages that sound small until you multiply them across horsepower and hours. And because they control the entire supply chain, from raw materials to finished casting, they can iterate faster than anyone else. A design change that would take Mercury 18 months to implement takes a Chinese manufacturer 6 weeks. They test it. If it works, it's in production. If it doesn't, they try something else. No committees, no quarterly reviews, no risk-averse executives worried about cannibalizing master's model. This is what vertical integration looks like when it's done right, and it's why the gap is widening instead of closing. Here's a vignette that makes it concrete. A commercial fisherman in Louisiana, guy named Roy, runs a 26-foot Parker, was burning through $1,200 a month in fuel. Rough estimate, but close enough. He was running a Yamaha 250 on the back. Great motor, thirsty as hell. Roy didn't care about technology, didn't care about brands, cared about margin, the difference between profit and selling the boat. A buddy told him about a Chinese 225 with the adaptive fuel system. Roy laughed, but the numbers were interesting enough that he kept thinking about it. Did some research, found a US-based importer with a warehouse in Texas, called them, asked hard questions. They didn't bullshit him, told him the truth. It's new tech, but it's proven, and if he didn't like it, they'd take it back within 90 days. Roy pulled the trigger, swapped motors, ran the same routes he always ran, logged fuel consumption for 3 months, and at the end of those 3 months, he was spending $780 on fuel. Same boat, same fishing grounds, same operating conditions. That's $420 a month, $5,000 a year. The motor paid for itself in under 3 years. And Roy's talking about it now, telling every fisherman he knows, because $5,000 a year is the difference between making it and not making it when diesel is $5 a gallon. That's adoption, not because of marketing, because of math. Now let's get uncomfortable and talk about quality control, because this is the objection you're already forming. Sure, the tech sounds good, sure, the price is attractive, but what about reliability? What about the horror stories? What about the guy whose Chinese motor grenaded after 50 hours? Those stories exist. They're real. And they're useful. Useful for keeping you scared. Useful for keeping you loyal. But here's what those stories don't tell you. Failure rates. You know what the failure rate is for a Mercury 4-stroke in the first year? About 4%. 1 in 25 motors will have a warranty claim. That's good. That's industry leading. That's the result of decades of refinement and quality control. You know what the failure rate is for a top-tier Chinese outbound in the first year? About 6%. Worse, but not catastrophically worse. 1 in 16 instead of 1 in 25. And here's the kicker. The Chinese brands are improving at twice the rate Mercury is, because they're newer, because they're iterating faster, because they have more to prove. 5 years ago, the failure rate on Chinese motors was closer to 15%. Unacceptable. Today, it's 6. In 2 more years, if the trend holds, it'll be under 4. And then the last argument dies. Because if the quality is equal, and the price is half, and the features are better, what exactly are you defending? This is the part where someone always brings up service. And it's a fair point. If something breaks, can you get it fixed? Can you get parts? Or are you stuck with a 250-pound paperweight? Let's test that. Let's say your Mercury has a fuel pump failure. You call your dealer, they order the part, it's back-ordered. ETA is 3 weeks, maybe 4, maybe 6 if it's summer and everyone's breaking down at once. You're dead in the water. Literally, your boat is a dock ornament until that part shows up. Now let's say your Chinese motor has the same failure. You open the app, you find the part number, you see it's in stock at a warehouse in California. You order it and ship same day, you have it in 48 hours, you install it yourself because the exploded diagram is clearer than anything Mercury ever printed, you're back on the water in 3 days. Which system is better? The one with more dealers or the one with better logistics? The answer is obvious, but admitting it means admitting you've been sold a story that stopped being true somewhere around 2020. And that's hard, because it means the premium you've been paying wasn't for quality, it was for the feeling of safety. The illusion that going with the known brand protects you. It doesn't, it just costs more. Let's talk about the manufacturing process, because this is where perception and reality are most divorced. You picture a Chinese factory, you probably picture chaos, sparks flying, workers in sandals. No automation, no precision, just volume, just cheap labor cranking out cheap products. That was true 20 years ago. It's not true now, and clinging to that mental image is costing you money. Modern Chinese outboard plants look like semiconductor fabs. Climate-controlled clean rooms, robotic assembly lines, automated quality control with laser measurement systems that check tolerances to the micron. They're not competing with your uncle's garage. They're competing with Honda's Ohio plant, and in some cases, they're winning. Here's why. When you build a factory from scratch in 2020, you don't install 20-year-old equipment. You install the latest CNC machines, the latest welding robots, the latest testing rigs. You design the workflow around efficiency and precision, not around legacy processes that made sense in 1995 but don't make sense now. Western manufacturers are stuck with infrastructure they built decades ago. Retooling is expensive, disruptive, so they optimize what they have. They incrementally improve. They stretch the lifespan of machines that should have been retired 10 years ago. And the result is plants that work but don't excel. Chinese plants don't have that baggage. They built everything new, and they built it right. Automated paint booths that eliminate human error, vision systems that catch defects a human inspector would miss, statistical process control that flags anomalies before they become failures. This isn't artisan craftsmanship, it's industrial precision at a level that would make Toyota jealous. And because they're vertically integrated, they control every step. They cast the blocks, they machine the parts, they assemble the motors, they test them, they crate them, all in the same industrial park. No handoffs, no delays, no playing telephone between suppliers. When they want to change something, they change it. When they want to test something, they test it. The speed is terrifying if you're trying to compete. Here's a technical vignette that illustrates the point. Yamaha wanted to reduce vibration in their F-150 motor. Great goal, smoother motor, happier customers. They identified the source, harmonic resonance in the midsection at certain RPM ranges. The fix required a redesign of the mounting brackets and a change in the rubber isolation compound. Yamaha's process? Engineering study, supplier negotiation, prototype tooling, testing, validation, production ramp. Timeline? 2 years. Cost? Millions. A Chinese manufacturer identified the same issue in their equivalent motor. They ran simulations, printed new brackets in-house, tested 12 different rubber compounds from their materials division, found the winner, redesigned the part, updated the tooling, put the new version into production. Timeline? 11 weeks. Cost? A fraction of what Yamaha spent. That's the advantage of vertical integration. That's what happens when you're not beholden to suppliers, quarterly earnings calls, and risk-averse leadership. You move fast, you fail fast, you fix fast, and you end up with a better product before your competitor finishes their feasibility study. Now let's address the elephant in the room: national security, trade policy, tariffs. The idea that buying Chinese is unpatriotic or dangerous or somehow funding your own obsolescence. It's a compelling narrative, it's emotionally satisfying, and it's largely irrelevant to your decision about what motor to buy. because the reality is more complicated and far less dramatic than the story you've been told. First, almost every outboard you think of as American or Japanese has Chinese components. The electronics, the sensors, the wiring harnesses, the fasteners. Mercury doesn't cast every bolt in Wisconsin. Yamaha doesn't wind every stator in Japan. Global manufacturing is a web, not a binary choice. Your Mercury has Chinese parts. Your Suzuki has Chinese parts. Pretending otherwise is denial. Second, the tariffs you've heard so much about, they're not stopping the motors from coming in. They're just making them more expensive, which means you're paying the tariff, not China. You. Every time you buy a Chinese motor through a US importer, you're covering that tariff in the purchase price. It's a tax on your decision to save money, and it's designed that way, to make the cheaper option just expensive enough that you think twice and default back to the domestic brand. But even with tariffs, the Chinese motors are still cheaper, which tells you how wide the margin really is. Third, the national security argument falls apart when you realize dependence runs both ways. We're dependent on Chinese manufacturing for electronics, batteries, and rare earth materials. They're dependent on US markets for revenue. If that balance ever breaks, your outboard is the least of your problems. You'll be worried about your phone, your car, your grid infrastructure. The idea that you're protecting America by buying a Mercury is comforting, but it's theater. What matters is this: do you want the best tool for the job at the best price, or do you want to signal loyalty to a brand that's been overcharging you for a decade while spending more on lobbying than R&D? You already know the answer. You're just deciding whether to admit it. Let's get into what happens next, because this isn't a stable equilibrium. The market is moving, and when markets move, they don't move slowly. Scenario 1. The legacy brands adapt. They cut prices. They accelerate R&D. They bring competitive products to market at competitive prices. This is the optimistic scenario, the one where competition makes everyone better and consumers win. It's possible, but it requires leadership that's willing to sacrifice short-term margins for long-term survival. And if you look at how these companies have behaved over the last 5 years, lawsuit-heavy, innovation-light, it doesn't inspire confidence. Scenario 2. Acquisition. Mercury or Yamaha or Brunswick buys a Chinese manufacturer outright, rebrands the motors, sells them through existing dealer networks with a markup. This is more likely. It preserves the dealer infrastructure. It lets the legacy brands claim innovation while outsourcing the actual work, and it keeps prices high enough that the margin structure doesn't collapse. You'll get better motors, but you won't get better prices. You'll just get better marketing. Scenario 3. Disruption. The Chinese brands bypass dealers entirely, sell direct to consumer, and undercut the establishment so aggressively that the dealer network collapses. It's the Tesla model. It's what Kohatsu and Suzuki are already scared of. And if it happens, every marine dealer in America has to decide whether they're selling boats and accessories or whether they're closing, because motors are the profit center. Kill that, and you kill the business model. Which scenario happens? All three, in different regions at different speeds. The market is too big and too fragmented for one outcome, but the direction is clear. The Chinese aren't going away. They're not slowing down. And every month you wait to pay attention is a month you spend more than you have to. Here's what this means for you specifically. If you're shopping for an outboard right now, you have a decision to make. Do you buy the known brand and accept the premium, or do you take the risk on something newer, cheaper, and possibly better? If you're risk-averse, if you keep your boat at a full-service marina, if you never turn a wrench yourself, then maybe the Mercury is still the right call. You're paying for the service network, for the familiarity, for the dealer who knows your name. That has value. Not $17,000 of value, but some value. But if you're comfortable doing your own maintenance, if you're willing to read a manual and watch a YouTube video, if you care more about performance per dollar than brand prestige, then the Chinese options are worth serious consideration. Not as a gamble, as a calculated bet that the data supports. And if you're a commercial operator, if fuel and maintenance are line items that determine whether you stay in business, then ignoring the Chinese motors isn't caution, it's malpractice, because your competitors are doing the math, and the ones who adapt first are the ones who survive. Here's the final twist, the one that makes you rethink everything. You know who's buying Chinese outboards in volume right now? Rental fleets, charter operations, guide services, the people who run motors harder than anyone, who can't afford downtime, who need reliability because their livelihood depends on it. They're not buying Chinese because they're cheap. They're buying Chinese because the cost of operation is lower and the performance is equal or better. They've done the real-world testing. They've logged the hours, they've tracked the failures, and they've made the switch. If the professionals trust it, why don't you? Because you're still buying the story. The story that American or Japanese means quality. The story that cheap means bad. The story that you're too smart to fall for marketing, even though the marketing is the exact reason you're still overpaying. The Chinese didn't just innovate on motors, they innovated on the entire value chain. Manufacturing, logistics, distribution, service. They looked at an industry that hadn't changed in 30 years and asked what would happen if you rebuilt it from scratch with modern tools and no legacy costs. The answer is sitting in a warehouse in Long Beach right now, waiting for you to stop listening to the dealer who profits from your fear and start listening to the guys who are already on the water running the gear. You don't have to be first, but you can't afford to be last. The industry is shifting. The question is whether you shift with it, or whether you're still making payments on an obsolete motor when the next guy is running twice as far on half the fuel and smiling every time he passes you at the dock. Your move.